We're going to crank around one row, and we're going to go very slowly. The two places where you're going to be most likely to lose stitches are right around the main mark and the halfway mark, because that's where we had all the hung stitches, and there are multiple stitches you're trying to knit through at once. So you can help there by pushing down a little bit on the weight as it goes by the 12 o'clock spot. Make sure all the stitches are falling under the latches. Same thing with your tail yarn. And then when those stitches are actually knitting around 1 o'clock, again, you can push down a little bit more with your weight. So now I'm coming up on the halfway mark, making sure all of those stitches are knitting. And then we're going to stop with the main mark at 9 o'clock and remove the weight, just to make sure every stitch has knit. All of mine did. You can cut off the tail yarn. Now it's time to reset your row counter. Replace your weight. Again, I keep using the heavy weight here, and you're going to crank the number of rows that you calculated for your foot. Again, the first couple of rows, you might want to go a little bit slowly, just keeping a sharp eye to make sure all of the stitches are knitting. So I noticed I had one stitch that dropped, so I removed my heavy weight and put in my little half-pound weight, and I picked it up. So it's on my latch tool. I picked up the first stitch I could save, which is a few rows down. Again, there's a whole video on how to do this, but I thought I'd just show you briefly while we're here and how this happen. So you first have to push forward until the stitch you've saved is below the latch, and then use your loom tool to lift up all the stitches and let them fall over the latch until just the one that you're trying to knit is above the latch, and then pull back. And this is very important. This is why you have to have some weight in the cylinder. You have to push up and forward. And then you can just re-knit each one like that. And again, there's a whole video with more instructions about this. But it does sometimes happen, and it's good to know how to repair it so you don't lose your entire project. And here then, always remember to take out the little weight, put back in your heavier weight, and you're ready to go again. My row counter has just turned to 46, which was my target number of rows, but I really haven't cranked the 46th row yet. So I'm going to go one more time around, and then right after it turns over to the next number, 47 in my case, I'm going to crank just a few more needles until the main mark is at 3 o'clock. And this will set us up for the wedge heel. So this is a good time to take a peek at the toe, make sure that it looks good, you don't have any big holes. If you wanted to redo it, this is a good time to stop and go back before you start on the heel. I'm going to take out the weight. We want to reattach the cable ring at the bottom and cinch it up to the top, always trying to put it as much in the center as possible. I'm going to put the medium weight back in. Then starting with the target mark that's at 5 o'clock, skip the first needle to the right of that, but lift the other needles, starting with the second needle around to the main mark at 3 o'clock. Now crank half a row until the main mark is at 9 o'clock. Now you're going to lift all the needles along the bottom half of the cylinder to the halfway mark. Crank the rest of that row. And then you're going to crank until the second needle from the mark. So we're skipping the needle that's directly left of the mark at 7 o'clock, lifting the rest of them. So 2/3 of the needles of your cylinder, roughly, a little more than that, should be raised at this point. We're going to start the first of 3 wedges for the heel. For the very first row, you simply lift one and then crank back the other direction. Before we go any farther, so we don't forget, we're going to add our heel forks. On the toe, we would lift one and then lower 2. On the wedge heel, it's lift 1, lower 3. So there's one lifted. As always, it's the last one knit with the working yarn attached. And then we're going to lower 3, again tucking the latches, or you can do the method where you push them down at 12 o'clock in between the 2 V-cams, so you do not have to tuck the latches. I want to stop and show you how to tell if you've pushed down the needles yet. Sometimes this can be a problem if you have a repair to fix or something and you can't tell, which is why I keep pointing out how to notice if steps have been done. The needle that has 2 stitches is the one that was lifted last time. So if the one that has 2 stitches is your first lifted needle, that means you have not yet pushed down your needles. It's correct if you have the needle with 2 stitches pushed down and then 2 more that have single stitches. That's what it should look like when you're ready to crank. Now, just as before, I'm going to crank around, always watching the first and the last needle to make sure they knit. Lift 1, lower 3 on the other side. And we are aiming for the wedge heel targets. On my cylinder, those are the blue ones. So the bottom 2/3 of the cylinder will be done.
Visit us at deanandbean.com and please like and subscribe. Thanks for watching.